Thank you. Whenever I hear that, I'm always amazed that I wonder who they're talking about. Good afternoon. The birth of our nation was unique in many, many ways, and its meaning is still argued continuously in the hallowed halls of history departments throughout the land. Was it a revolution? Was it a civil war? No one can quite decide. After all, remember, women, slaves, and non-property owning males did not experience much revolution or change from this break from Britain. Only property owning white males actually won something. The questions and the arguments can quickly make all but the hardiest of history buffs yawn uncontrollably, which we're going to try not to do today. So bear with me. But one thing that everyone does agree is that the break from Britain and the tiny, unstable republic, the United Colonies, was the foundation and the beginning of a major worldwide experiment with a form of government called democracy. And all will agree that the cornerstone of that foundation was the Declaration of Independence. The history of this document is full of intrigue, mystery, and sadly, most of us know very little about the document, except Thomas Jefferson wrote it, and our favorite phrase, life, liberty, and most importantly, of course, the pursuit of happiness. Until the end of this month, we're exhibiting two original versions of the famed work. In order to understand their meaning, their importance, and their own history, we have to start a few years before they were created. On June 7th, 1776, the clearest call for independence was heard in Philadelphia by the Second Continental Congress when Richard Henry Lee of Virginia read the following: Resolved, that these United Colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is, and ought to be, totally dissolved. The Lee resolution was an expression of what was already beginning throughout the colonies. The Congress was slowly developing into a national government, and one by one they were cutting the ties with Britain. At the same time, colonists themselves were becoming convinced of the inevitability of independence. Thomas Paine's Common Sense was published in January 1776 and sold by the thousands. Of course, as we well know even today, not all members of Congress agreed. But the tone said that they were probably going to eventually agree, they just had to argue some more. And so, before they stopped arguing and called what we now are very familiar with a recess, they convened and named, guess what? A committee. They left the committee of 5 to draft a statement presenting to the world the colony's case for independence. The committee consisted of 2 New England men, John Adams of Massachusetts, Roger Sherman of Connecticut, 2 men from the middle colonies, Benjamin Franklin of Pennsylvania, Robert Livingston of New York, and only one but very important Southerner, Thomas Jefferson of Virginia. In 1823, Jefferson wrote that the other members of the committee unanimously pressed on myself alone to undertake the draft. I consented, I drew it, but before I reported it to the committee, I communicated it separately to Dr. Franklin and Mr. Adams, requesting their corrections. I then wrote a fair copy, reported it to the committee, and from them unaltered to the Congress. On July 1st, 1776, Congress reconvened. The following day, the Lee Resolution for Independence was adopted. But until the morning of the 4th, the discussion in Congress continued, resulting in some alterations and deletions, but the basic document remains Jefferson's. Then at last, church bells rang over Philadelphia. The Declaration had officially been adopted. But now, remember, it's the 18th century, so the committee needed to supervise the printing of the adopted document. The first copies of the Declaration of Independence were printed in the shop of John Dunlap. His version is on the screen. The committee took to Dunlap the manuscript document. Sadly, this original handwritten document has been missing and lost and never found. It is not known how many copies John Dunlap printed on his busy night of July 4th, But as of 1989, only 24 copies of this, what is now known as the Dunlap broadside, were known to exist. Until a flea market shopper bought a framed painting, remember it's 1989, for $4. While inspecting a tear in the lining behind the painting, the owner discovered a folded Dunlap broadside. This 25th copy was authenticated, and in June 2000, Norman Lear and David Hayden purchased the document for $8.14 million. Not a bad investment, $4. It was in great condition because no one knows how long it was folded and pressed inside that lining. So on June 2nd, 2009, it was announced that a 26th broadside was discovered in the National Archives in Kew, England, by a researcher cataloging a random box of old documents. Therefore, there are 26 known copies to exist, and one is in the hands of the Maine Historical Society. I did try to borrow it for this exhibit, but the condition of the majority of these are they're really in bad shape, which was what made the Norman Lear version worth $8 million. So they wouldn't let me have it, is the bottom line. So you have to look at it here. The important differences here are, you notice it'll say it's just a declaration. It is literally way before the signing took place. It is just approving the words that we really think we should be independent. By July 9th, 1776, all the state conventions approved and signified and approved their acceptance. Now Congress ordered the declaration be fairly engrossed on parchment with the title and style of the unanimous declaration of the 13 United States of America, and that the same, when engrossed, be signed by every member of Congress. Engrossing is a process of preparing an official document in large, clear hand. Timothy Matlack was probably the engrosser of the declaration. Matlack set to work with pen, ink, parchment, and practiced hand, and finally on August 2nd, the Journal of the Continental Congress records that the Declaration of Independence, being engrossed and compared at the table, was signed. One of the most widely held misconceptions about the Declaration is that it was signed on July 4th. It was not. It was signed by some of the delegates on August 2nd, 1776. John Hancock, President of the Congress, was the first to sign with the famous big signature. He used a bold signature centered below the text. But in accordance with prevailing custom, the other delegates began to sign at the right, below the text, their signatures arranged according to the geographic location of the states they represented. Therefore, New Hampshire, the northernmost state, began the list, and Georgia, the southernmost, ended it. Eventually, 56 delegates signed, although not all were present on the 2nd. 5 signed later, and 2 never signed, suddenly not in an agreement, even though they had voted on it back on the 4th of July. The non-signers were John Dickerson and Robert Livingston. Once the Declaration was signed, the document probably accompanied the Continental Congress as the body traveled through the uncertain months and years of the Revolution. Initially, like any other parchment documents of the time, the Declaration was probably stored in a rolled format, then placed in a linen bag. Each time the document was used, it would have been unrolled and re-rolled. This action, as well as holding the curled parchment flat, took its toll, as you can see, and it has not necessarily been kind to the document itself. The good news is the acidity inherent in the iron gall ink used by Matlack allowed the ink to bite into the surface, thus contributing to at least the ink remaining, but the rolling and unrolling has caused enough damage, as you can see. In January 1777, Congress decided that more copies needed to be made available for all the colonies, and Mary Catherine Goddard's printing house fulfilled the second approved printing, this time with the names of the signers included. No one knows how many of these were printed, but as of today, there are only 9 known copies still in existence today. The majority are at the National Archives, the University of Virginia, and the Library of Congress. We'll return to the original in a minute, but let's now move on to the copies. After the War of 1812, there was a resurgence of patriotism. The events of 1776 were 35 years past. The signers were aging, many had died. Americans had begun, though, to revere the quickly deteriorating parchment. Two entrepreneurs, in a true American sense, John Binns and Benjamin Owen Tyler, each saw a market for a large print of the Declaration. They entered into a bitter competition to be the first to publish and sell monumental prints with the official text of the Declaration. Each publisher pressed for validation that his version was the correct and true from the State Department, which had custody of the original Declaration at the time. Eventually, this is the Binns copy, before I go on. This is the Binns copy. It is, as you can see, there's actually, when you look at it closely, there's a lot of inaccuracies. They have George Washington, of course, in the center, Thomas Jefferson to the right. To the left, they have Hancock, only because they really liked him, not for any other reason. And by the way, this copy angered Jefferson, really made him mad. It made him cranky, because he was not a real fan of Hancock's at that time. Okay, so eventually both versions were certified. And you can see the certification on the Tyler document. Well, you can't on this one, but when you see the one that, by the way, is one of the Tylers is being exhibited here at the library. And when you see it, you can see that the document was, it has a certification on the top part of the document. This particular document we're showing was borrowed from the Bangor Museum. Sadly, we have no history of how they received it or where it was from. It was certified as authentic in 1976 after it was found in a map storage drawer, quietly lying for heaven only knows how long between two ancient maps of Bangor during the Revolutionary War period. If you look closely at the copy in the library, you can see how very damaged it is. However, the quality of the ink preservation is remarkable. And if you look at the top left-hand side, you might find another discovery that may tell historians one of the homes of this document. It says for Thomas Jefferson, handwritten on the top of the document. The Tyler engraving of 1818 showed the text of the Declaration with the initial lines of text formed in decorative arched heading. A number of the phrases are highlighted, bolded, in different lettering. While the Tyler engraving text was not exact, the signatures below were a full-size facsimile of the original document. And then came Stone. The competition and politicking of Binns and Tyler very likely influenced John Quincy Adams, then Secretary of State, to take action. About 1820, Adams commissioned Washington engraver William Stone to produce a facsimile of the Declaration text and signatures. Stone completed engraving a copper plate in June 1823 and sold it to the State Department, which had 200 copies printed on parchment. A congressional resolution passed after the prints had been completed, specifying the distribution of the 200 engravings to official repositories, significant office holders, and the surviving signers of the Declaration, including Thomas Jefferson and John Adams. Many have questioned how Stone made the engraving. A Washington newspaper report at the time in 1823 noted that Stone labored for 3 years to complete the engraving, but he gave no description of the method. Possible methods include tracing by hand or with a tracing device or press copy. Press copy was made by moistening an ink original and pressing the original against paper to transfer an ink offset, a technique used then to copy files or letters of files at the time. Other possible methods include tracing by hand, tracing using a mechanical device in which an image projected through a pinhole is traced onto the surface. Such tracings had been done for centuries, and American artists used this method in the 1700s to trace portrait silhouettes. Unlike Binns and Tyler prints, The stone engraving shows both the text and the signatures in facsimile, very close in appearance to the original. The most recognizable feature of the stone engraving is its large size and almost the exact size of the original parchment. Another characteristic is that the State Department had stones engraving printed on parchment, a specially prepared animal skin that is thicker than paper. Finally, the 1823 printing included a line at the top that was printed at the order of Adams, engraved by W.I. Stone for the Department of State by order of J.Q. Adams, Secretary of State, July 4th, 1823. Of the original 200 prints on parchment, fewer than 24 have been located today. One is on exhibit here. It was donated to the Bangor Historical Society in December 1914 by Jeanette Rogers. Until 1953, the document remained in a desk drawer, and no one thought it had any value because experts had said through the 1900s that only one copy existed out of the known copies under government and university control. The Bangor copy was then moved to the basement of the headquarters from 1953 to 1974, still not recognized for the treasure it is. And guess what happened in the basement of an old building in Bangor, Maine? I mean, I'm cold just thinking about it. The document that we have exhibited is here, as it was found in 1974. The condition report at the time, now this is not for the weak of heart here. And if you've just eaten, you might want to rethink it. You might want to rethink listening what happened and the conservation methods of 1974 that we now consider reasonably archaic, and I'm sure someday in 2050 somebody will think our measures are archaic. So with all due respect, they found it finally in the basement. Other copies had been found, and they finally realized that it's possible they had something here. So they sent it to a conservator in this condition. The first report of the condition was, I love this, extreme cockling. I assume that means messed up. It was caused by, of course, the wetness, the dampness. They had also at some point along the way added a piece of paper to correct a tear. They had used animal glue, horrible thing. And the whole sheet was extremely dirty, grimy, dusty. And the worst thing a conservator or anybody dealing with old paper can find, it contained many fly specks. Oof. The enemy of all paper. Today, what we do if we would find something like this is, you don't try to alter the document. You try to just maintain it in the condition it's in, because the condition it's in is also a historic fact of how it got there. That's our policy today. We try to preserve them just so they don't get worse. I'm not sure what we would have done with this one. We might have done what they did, which is remove the patch. Let's see, see the patch up on the top. Remove that patch and replace that patch with rice paper, because they couldn't find, of course, the original kind of parchment that was used on the original document. They dusted it, they vacuumed it, they got off the worst of the grime. Okay, now it's when it starts to get a little ugly. And then they did what your mother has done to you probably more than once, if you all remember. They finished removing the grime by swabbing it with saliva. When in doubt, you just spit on it. We also try not to do that today, unless we're really driven to spit. For a series of different reasons, of course. Okay, and after all the cleaning was completed, the softening process now, after they spit on it, they rubbed alcohol on it. Well, yeah. And that was followed by, and here's where it gets even more interesting, a swabbing of urea solution. Yeah, you know what that is, don't you? I can't say it. We're being taped. So let's get this right. They spit on it, they threw alcohol on it, and then all because we wanted to conserve it. It's a beautiful thing. I love that part of the story. Anyway, they finally got it, as you can see, slowly. Then once after all the moisture was put on it, they slowly kept pushing it down under glass and blotters until they got it to look like that. So we're grateful they did. We sort of wish they would have done it a different way. However, it ends up now, as you will see it in the library. They then put it on acid-free mat and a frame, and the correct kind of glass at the time in the 70s. It's not the correct glass that we would use today, so there is still some damage being done to it as we exhibit it, but we won't tell Bangor that. So that's basically how it looks today. Now, what about the original? From 1826 to 1921, the Declaration and its preservation were discussed by one government committee after another. 100 years they talked about it. In 1903, President Theodore Roosevelt got tired of all the talking, and he ordered that all Congressional or Continental Congress papers be turned over by the State Department to the Library of Congress, and they should be exhibited. This was new. Exhibition caused them to have more meetings, because there is nothing worse that a historian or a curator likes to do than to actually show you their stuff. It's just, it's got to be kept in a dark vault. It pains them, doesn't it? They're all shaking their heads, the ones that aren't. So more committees met, but by 1924, the Declaration was housed at the Library of Congress in a frame of gold-plated bronze doors and covered with double panes of plate glass with specially prepared gelatin films between the plates to exclude the harmful rays of light. It was guarded 24 hours a day. With only one interruption, the Declaration hung on the wall of the second floor of the Library of Congress until 1952. But on August 7th, some of you, well, we know it historically, we don't necessarily maybe remember it. December 7th, 1941, the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. So on December 23rd, the Declaration was removed from its shrine, placed between two sheets of acid-free manila paper. The document was then carefully wrapped in a container of all-rag neutral millboard and placed in a specially designed bronze container. It was late at night when the container was finally secured with padlocks on both sides. This was all done under armed guard. The container was finally sealed with lead and packed in a heavy box. The whole weight now of this little piece of parchment was 150 pounds. I'm suggesting that was a far cry from the simple linen bag of 1776. We were getting a little obsessive. But the box, along with other boxes containing vital records, was loaded into an armed and escorted truck, taken to Union Station, loaded into a compartment of a Pullman sleeper car. Armed Secret Services surrounded it in neighboring compartments. It departed from Washington, traveled to Louisville, Kentucky. More Secret Service agents joined it, and, just to be sure, a cavalry troop of the 13th Armored Division met the train. We were really getting carried away. They, in procession, took it to Fort Knox. It was placed in compartment number 24 in the outer tier on the upper level. It was examined periodically while it was in Fort Knox during the war. Conservation repairs were made after the military assured the Library of Congress that the danger of enemy attack had passed. The Declaration was then returned to the Library of Congress. It was back in its shrine. In 1951, the Declaration was sealed in a thermal pane enclosure filled with properly humidified helium. The exhibit case was equipped with a filter to screen out damaging light. The new enclosure also had the effect of preventing harm from air pollution, a new and terrible peril to old documents, especially parchment. And then, sadly, after years of childish, and I do not say that, I mean childish bickering between the director of the Library of Congress and the first, sadly, archivist of the United States. The two men were finally just simply ordered by the president to begin working with their staff and legal advisors and transfer the documents to the National Archives. We don't have any pictures of it, but history has it that the director of the Library of Congress laid down on the floor, tried not to let them take it. I mean, you know, it was almost as ugly as the 150-pound box. Finally, on December 15th, 1952, in front of display cases circling the hall of the Rotunda in the National Archives, President Harry Truman was the feature speaker, and he said, "The Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights are now assembled in one place for display and safekeeping. We are engaged here today in a symbolic act. We are enshrining these documents for future ages. This magnificent hall has been constructed to exhibit them, and the vault beneath that we have built to protect them is as safe from destruction as anything that the wit of modern man can devise. All this is an honorable effort based upon reverence for the great past, and our generation can take just pride in it." How the documents are stored at night is still considered a classified secret by the United States government. The present shrine does provide an imposing home. The priceless documents stand at the center of a semicircle of display cases showing other important records involving the growth of the United States. The Declaration, the Constitution, and the Bill of Rights stand slightly elevated from the rest under armed guard in their bronze and marble shrines. The Declaration of Independence is held impressively in an upright case constructed of ballistically tested glass and plastic laminate. Ultraviolet light filters in the laminate, giving the inner layer a slight greenish hue. At night, the documents are stored in an underground vault, still classified. In 1987, the National Archives installed a $3 million camera and computerized system to monitor the condition of the three documents. The Charters monitoring system was designed by the Jet Propulsion Laboratory to assess the state of preservation of the Constitution, the Declaration, and the Bill of Rights. It can detect any change in readability due to ink flaking, offset of ink to glass, changes in the dimensions, and ink fading. The Declaration has had many homes. It's been carried in wagons, ships, a Pullman sleeper, and an armed vehicle. In its latest home, it has been viewed with great respect by millions of people from around the globe. Every one of them has had a brief moment, a private moment, to reflect the meaning of democracy. The nation to which the Declaration gave birth has had an immense impact on human history and continues to do so. The story of the Declaration of Independence as a document can only be part of a larger history, a history still unfolding. I hope you enjoy the Tyler and Stone declarations, and I hope now when you see them, you look at them with a more sharp and knowing and respectful eye. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry. We do have time for some questions. If you raise your hand, we'll get a microphone to you. Yes, sir. Coming behind you.
You mentioned Jefferson saying that he wrote it by himself and then gave copies to Adams and Franklin for proofing, and they sent it on unchanged to the Congress. It wasn't that lucky in Congress. Can you describe some of the salient changes that Congress made to Jefferson's wording?
Yes, actually, one of the best visions, or the best way to look at it is in Jefferson's autobiography. He includes the original he wrote and then the changes they made and how they made them. And it angered him terribly. I mean, he was not at all happy with the changes they made. They softened it. He had his description of King George in the center of the document was a lot more aggressive, shall we say. It was ugly. I mean, you know, he called him a tyrant and a killer and a murderer and those kind of things. They softened that a little bit and just said, we just don't want to hang with you anymore, kind of stuff, you know. They took out the real hateful stuff. And also Jefferson had more mention of slaves in there, and how we should start to think about handling that and break away from that tradition that was still a British tradition at that time. And it's really interesting to look at it. That they also made some changes. Inalienable right is because of the Congress. He had indestructible and inalienable, and they took indestructible and out. Small changes. The body of it, the heart of it, the soul of it is still Jefferson. It's just, it almost looks like something that Congress would do today. You know, I mean, it really does. It's sort of scary that they're still doing it the same way. We've learned nothing, I think. They just softened it. Did that answer your question?
Johnny?
Since you're referencing Jefferson, one question that immediately pops to my mind is, how many people think that separation of church and state is in the Declaration, even though it wasn't until 1803 that Jefferson gave the response to the Danbury Baptist?
Well, my answer to that is, is our education system. Separation of church and state is much better defined in the Constitution, not in the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration of Independence is really, if you look at it from 21st century terms, is almost like a mission statement of a business. It's the mission vision statement. It's what we want to be. It's not what we are right now. It's what we hope to achieve. And the Constitution, therefore, would then be like the tactical business plan that gets you there. And I think people just aren't educated. There's so much that people don't know about those original documents and how they got there, and the reason that they were included, when they were included, where they were included in an 18th century document.
Anyone else?
Well, the hard ones are going to come. I know. They're trying to figure out how to trick me. Go ahead. Come on. Okay, well, enjoy it, take a look at it, and if you do get a chance, make the trip to Washington. When you walk into that rotunda, your heart stops for just a second.
Well, Terri, thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
sharing that. Thank all y'all for coming out.